Well, hello and welcome to our Bible study for today from the awesome book of Isaiah. Today we're going to bring silence into our study of Isaiah chapter 41. But before I explain that, let me read Isaiah chapter 41. Be silent for me, foreign shores. Peoples must renew their strength. They must draw near, then speak. Together let us come forward for the making of a decision. Who aroused someone from the east, whom faithlessness summons to its heel? He gives up nations before him, enables him to put down kings. He makes them like dirt with his sword, like driven straw with his bow. As he pursues them, he passes on in peace, by a path on which he doesn't go straight. Who acted and did it, summoning the generations from the beginning? I am Yahweh the first, and I myself am with the last. Foreign shores have seen and become afraid. Earth's ends tremble. They have drawn near and come. One person helps his neighbor and says to his brother, "Hold firm." Craft worker bids smith hold firm. One who flattens with a hammer. One who strikes with a mallet. One who says of the joint, "It's good," holds it firm with fastings, so it doesn't wobble. But you, as Israel, are my servant. As Jacob, you are the one that I chose as the offspring of Abraham. You are my friend, the one of whom I took hold from earth's ends, summoned from its corners, and said to you, "You are my servant. I chose you and did not spurn you." Don't be afraid, because I am with you. Don't be frightened, because I am your God. I am strengthening you, yes, helping you, yes, supporting you with my faithful right hand. There, they will be shamed and disgraced, all who rage at you. They will become absolutely nothing. They will perish, the people who contend with you. You will seek them and not find them. The people who attack you, they will become absolutely nothing, zero, the people who do battle against you. Because I am Yahweh your God, who takes hold of your right hand and who says, "Don't be afraid. I myself am helping you. Don't be afraid, worm Jacob, relics Israel. I'm helping you. Israel's Holy One is your restorer. There I'm making you into a harrow, a new thresher fitted with points. You will trample mountains and crush them, and make hills like chaff. You will winnow them, and the wind will carry them. The storm will scatter them, and you yourselves will rejoice in Yahweh, in Israel's Holy One. You will exult. The lowly and needy are seeking water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst. I, Yahweh, will answer them. The God of Israel will not abandon them. I will open up streams on the bare places, springs in the midst of the vales. I will make the wilderness into a pool of water, dry land into watercourses. In the wilderness I will put cedar, acacia, and myrtle, and oil tree. In the steppe I will set juniper, maple, and cypress together, so that people will see and acknowledge, consider and understand together that Yahweh's hand did this. Israel's Holy One created this. Bring your case forward, Yahweh says. Bring near your strong points, says Yahweh's, Jacob's king. They should bring them near and tell us what will happen. The previous events tell us what they were, so we may apply our mind and recognize their outcome, or inform us of the coming events. Tell us that they will arrive after, so we may acknowledge you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, so we may bow low and see together. There, you're less than nothing. Your action is less than a sigh. It's an outrage that someone chooses in you. I aroused one from the north, and he arrived. From the rising of the sun, one who was to call on my name. He came on viceroys, as it were mire, as if he was a potter who treads clay. Who told of it from the beginning, so he might acknowledge him beforehand, so we might say he was right? No, there was no one telling of it. No, there was no one informing about it. No, there was no one hearing your words. the first for Zion. There they are, for Jerusalem. I give a bringer of news. Were I to look, there was no one of them. There was no consultant who I could respond with a word if I asked them. There they are all a bane. Their acts are zero. Their images are a breath, emptiness. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As you see, God calls for silence so that the people can renew their strength. It's silence before God which expresses submission to God, not a silence that amounts to listening to ourselves. God urges silence, but at the same time, the nations to speak, just as if it was a court trial. And the encouragement to the nations is ironic because it presupposes that the nations will have nothing to say in response to the questions Yahweh is asking. The question is about a conqueror who comes from the east. And this is both Abraham in his day, coming from the east and across, and then leading the people gradually through his descendants to the promised land, and more recently for them to Cyrus, the Medo-Persian king, who is rampaging through the Middle East to the north before turning his attention to Babylon. It's worth mentioning just a little bit about that history so you can just see the background. Cyrus came from Persia, which was subject to Media when Cyrus became king in 559 BC, but by 549 BC, 10 years later, he'd overthrown the Median king Astyages and founded the Persian Empire. He moved west and conquered Lydia and Asia Minor, that's Turkey to us, then to northwest India, and then Babylon in 539, so 20 years after he started. And there was no carnage, and as he took power, he sent captive peoples back to their homelands and allowed them to worship as they saw fit. And you can read about that in Ezra chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. The people didn't know about all of that bit, of course, when Isaiah was writing. So asks Isaiah, whose initiative lies behind the actions of Abraham and Cyrus? Mine, says Yahweh, says God. Do you have any other suggestions? No? Well then shut up. That's kind of the way in which this passage runs. Each of these conquerors was the agent of Yahweh's faithful purposes in the world. Interesting. So you've got one person who acknowledges God and is trying to do everything that God wants him to do, and the other who is not, so far as we know, in any way a worshipper of God, and yet is used for God's purposes. The peoples of the Middle East are understandably panicking as they watch events unfold. And what can they do? They can only think of making another image of a God to whom they can appeal. And we know from chapter 40 that that is not sensible. You couldn't blame the Judahites for reacting in the same way as everyone else, could you? Well, yes, you could, because they ought to know better. They ought to look at things differently. You're my servant, my chosen offering, chosen offspring of Abraham, my friend. They thought God had abandoned them, and it wasn't so. Many individuals had been described as God's servant, people like Moses and David, meaning that God was committed to them and had a purpose for them to achieve. But here we have Israel described as God's servant, a big privilege. Before you kick this servant, you need to ask who the owner of this servant is. They didn't have to fear what God was doing politically. They don't have to fear other people attacking them because God will protect them. They may feel like a worm, but God can turn them from being a small earth mover to something much more impressive that can trample mountains. Indeed, whatever they have to face. A threshing sledge, which is part of the translation, was a heavy wooden platform with sharp cutting edges fitted below, so massive earth mover. Whatever we have to face, we shouldn't fear with God beside us. The people are then described as thirsty with nothing to drink. In Exodus chapter 17, the people grumbled about the lack of water. Moses prayed, and the answer was prayer, not grumbling. God can transform the desert into a flourishing and fertile land. This is what God intends to do. They're going to come to life again. People will see it and recognize what God is doing, because Yahweh is the Holy One of Israel. He is bound to act in a way that recognizes the demands placed on him by that relationship. The people aren't to give in to fear, which is the antithesis of trust that had characterized Abraham. They could trust God because he promises to strengthen, help, and uphold them. What God has done before, he will do again. He will act as Israel's restorer. That's someone within the family with the resources to get you out of trouble if your harvest fails or you get into debt. This person restores you to a new and viable life. And if you want to know about that, read the story of the book of Ruth. Here God does this for the whole of Israel. He restores them. God is freeing the world of the Babylonian domination and asks whose decision-making lies behind the conqueror from the east. Yahweh makes things happen. It's further evidence that he's God. The Babylonian gods can't make sense of the events because they can't do anything, good or bad. Yahweh is giving his servant to the nation as a covenant or a light. In other words, Yahweh's servant embodies what it means to have Yahweh in a covenant relationship, to shine in your life and mine. It's not just for Israel, but for all nations. What a great teacher and pastor was Isaiah. He sustained weary people by bringing them back to the fundamentals of their faith, the promises of God and the faithfulness of God. And we need to keep reminding each other of those things. More